Hi everyone, welcome to our next lesson in relationship poetry. Today we're going to look at our fifth poem, I believe, Remember by Christina Rossetti. So you need to turn to page 9 of your anthologies to make your notes and to follow through these annotations. And remember to make your boxes to put your key information in. So we should have our context box, our structure box, our comparison box, which we will start using today, and our arguments box. So to begin, we want to think about the title Remember. Now, firstly, when we look at the Remember, we want to think about, first of all, what does that word actually mean and what are its connotations? And secondly, remember is an imperative, so it is an instruction, it is a verb. So this person is asking us to remember. So I suppose the two questions I want to think about are, first of all, what does the word remember mean? What does it make you think of? What kind of things would we need to remember? And secondly, what is the effect of having an imperative as the title? In previous poems, we've had questions as titles, which made us think that the poet was going to try and answer the question. What is the difference having an imperative? So pause this, have a little think about it, and then we'll go through this poem, annotating it in a moment. So, first of all, the word remember has connotations of something which has gone, something which has been lost or forgotten. If someone needs to remember, it means that thing is no longer around. So we should think about ideas of death, or maybe somebody's love that is no longer existing. Having an imperative gives the idea that this poem is actually directed at a person in particular, that this poem is not a sort of a thinking or a thought about love, but more of an instruction. What should somebody do who has lost love? So we're expecting this poem to be quite direct and quite instructional to the person it's being delivered to. So as always, what we want to do before we go through the annotations is have a go yourself. So again, pause this video and think about these two questions as you read the poem on page 9. First of all, who is speaking? Is it a first person speaker or a third person speaker? Do you think it's Rossetti speaking herself, or is she writing as a character? Secondly, what is happening in the poem? Try and label it with what you think is going on. Remember to use pencil for this. And lastly, as an extension, think about the way it is structured. Remember, poetry is different from novels, different from plays, because the structure is much more strict. So think about, does it have stanzas? Is it broken into little parts or one larger poem? Are the line lengths the same? Does it rhyme? So when we did the last couple poems, we looked at the rhyme scheme. You can do your A's and B's. And lastly, is there a metre? Does it have a pattern to it like Shakespeare's did? So have a go at that, have a read. Take 2 or 3 minutes to do that. Once you've had a read for yourself, again, press play and we'll go through this poem, the context, the structure, and the annotations. So in terms of form and structure, this poem is very, very similar to How Do I Love Thee by Elizabeth Barrett Browning that we did a couple of lessons ago. It is a sonnet. It is a traditional love form of poetry. Now, like Elizabeth Barrett Browning and unlike Shakespeare, this is a Petrarchan sonnet. So again, it's split into 2. We have the first section is an octet, so 8 lines where the poet presents an issue or a problem. And this uses envelope rhyme, so A, B, B, A, B, B, A. If you found that on your poem when you read it yourself, well done. And then the second part is a sestet, so 6 lines, which then offers a message or a solution. Now, unlike Barrett Browning, the rhyme scheme for this was a bit more complicated. Barrett Browning's was CD, CD, CD. This one is CD, C, D, D, E, C, E. So it's still cross-rhymed, but the cross-rhymes are a little bit less organised. It's in iambic pentameter, so we have 10 syllables per line, so it has quite a consistent rhythm. And again, we have a first-person speaker. And again, although this poem is about remembering, it's really about an instruction for the future. How should somebody think when the person they love is gone? So make a note of this in your structure box, so we can talk about these things later when we write about these poems. And we'll move on to context. So who was Christina Rossetti and how did her life influence her writing? So first of all, she was a Victorian poet. She was born in 1830 to a very brilliant family. Her father was exiled from Italy was a famous academic. So he went and he taught Italian and he worked in universities. She had brothers and sisters. One of her brothers became a very famous artist, a pre-Raphaelite artist, and her other brothers and sisters were also very successful. And Christina Rossetti became one of the finest poets of the Victorian period. A lot of people think that she is one of the great English poets. Her poetry is often very simple, but yet extremely well constructed and very beautiful in its arguments and messages. Unlike Barrett Browning, who we read earlier, who had a terrible childhood, Rossetti had a very happy childhood. She lived in a very wealthy family. Her family was very close. They got on very well. There were no issues in her life really at all. But as a child, she was very, very passionate. So like her brother Gabriel, both of them had a very passionate temper and could often really easily be raised to anger. She was a very deeply religious person, and as she got older, she rejected a number of men. She had some sort of romances, but they never went anywhere because of different religious beliefs. And in her life, she never got married. So she never knew that kind of stable relationship that most people at the time had. As she got older, she suffered from Graves' disease, which is a horrible illness which quite badly impairs people and threatened her life. But she continued to write, she continued her devotion to God, and she eventually died from breast cancer in 1894. When Rossetti was writing her poetry in the 1800s, she was writing during the period of the first feminist movement, where the arguments began for women to have the vote, and her work often focuses on the themes of gender and the female experience. So what was it like to be a female during the Victorian period? People often say her poems are almost perfect combination of her really passionate, lively personality and all the emotions and feelings that she had, linked with her deep spiritual devotion. She was a very religious person, she was very devoted to God, and those two themes come out in her poems. So I think the key things here we want to try and get in our context box. So first of all, that she was very deeply religious. Secondly, that she never married herself or found love. And lastly, that her poems are very often seen as being feminist poems and involve gender issues. So make sure that your context and your structure box are done, and we will then move on to look at the poem itself. Okay, so as you can see, this is the poem. What I've done so far in the annotation is I have put down where the rhymes happen. I have split the poem from the octet here to the sestet down here. So this is the first half of the poem where our first argument will come from, and this is the second half of the poem where our second argument will come from. I've also written here the word volta, because this is the bit where the poem changes. So the technical term, if a poem has a change in tone or feeling, is a volta. So I've also up here, I've annotated the title with things we said earlier on. So it's an imperative or a command, and that something has gone, or been lost, and maybe it's to do with death and the word remember. So let's go through this poem, make some annotations and notes, and understand it fully. Remember me when I am gone away, gone far away into the silent land, when you can no more hold me by the hand, nor I half turn to go, yet turning stay. Okay, so let's begin. So we can start by looking at this here. So we have remember me. Now again, this is a imperative. So it's an instruction to somebody. So it's almost like it's very direct. It's talking to one person about what they should do. Remember me when I am gone away. Now gone away means to have left. At this point we don't know where this person has gone. Gone away, gone far away, okay, into the silent land. Now the silent land here is a metaphor for death. So pretty simple so far. Remember me when I have gone away, not just away for a holiday, but far away into the silent land. When you can no more hold me by the hand. Now hold me by the hand, of course, is a kind of romantic gesture. So we know here that we're talking about love. When you can no more hold me by the hand, nor I half turn to go, yet turning stay. So the half turn to go here is this idea of sort of trying to leave, but then staying. So there's an idea here that this relationship maybe is not quite so stable, that they constantly are in and out of love. She's not talking about a short separation, but she's talking about the big separation. This is really about death. Now remember, at this point, the speaker is not dead. This is about the future. So what should you do in the future? So simply, when I'm gone and our love is finished, that you should remember me. Remember me. So again, we have a bit of repetition here. And again, another imperative. Remember me when no more day by day you tell me of our future that you planned. Okay. So day by day. So we're talking about a sort of a relationship that's quite serious, I suppose. They see each other every day. You tell me of our future that you planned. Interestingly here, so there's a sense here that about him having control perhaps. He's the one controlling the future. But of course, the future that you planned is a kind of idea of like a long love, or like a long relationship. Only remember me. Okay, this line here you can see is sort of foregrounded. You understand it will be too late to counsel then or pray. So there's nothing else you can do. All you can do at this point is remember. Counsel means to speak to. Pray means to speak to God. So of course pray is to God and counsel is to her. These are speaking. So this part here is saying there is nothing else you can do. So the first part is saying, when I'm gone, remember me. Remember our love, remember all the things that we've done. Second part says that essentially all you can do is remember. There's nothing else you can do. Once she's gone, you can't talk to her. Praying doesn't matter because she's already with God. So therefore all you can do is remember. So therefore we've said the first octet here is really about her desperation to be remembered. She doesn't want to be forgotten or let go. However, when we come into the sestet, we see that there is a volta. Now the key word here is the word yet. Yet always means a change. So in the sestet, we're going to see a change in her feelings. Yet, if you should forget me for a while, so forget, of course, is the opposite of remember. So if this person forgets her for a while and afterwards remember, do not grieve. So grieve means to be sad, or like intensely sad. It's an idea that when somebody dies and they're no longer around every single day, day to day, that it's possible that you might forget. And her message is, if you do forget me, if there's a moment in your life where you don't think about me anymore, and then suddenly you go, oh my God, I forgot about her, do not be sad. For if the darkness and corruption leave a vestige of the thoughts that I once had, better by far that you should forget and smile than that you should remember and be sad. Okay, so darkness and corruption are probably references to death / the sad feelings. So if in the terrible situation of my death, a vestige, now vestige means a tiny piece. So a tiny piece of the thoughts that I once had. So if you only remember a very, very small thing about me, if I only exist in your mind as a tiny little thing, it is better by far. So this here is saying that it is not just a little bit, but this is actually the best way of being. That you should forget and smile. Then you should remember and be sad. So we see here we have the juxtaposition of smile and sad. We also have a juxtaposition of forget and remember. So the poem takes quite a big twist. The first part of the poem seems to be saying, remember me, as an instruction. It is best that I want you to remember, I don't want to be forgotten by you, I want to be important even after I'm gone. And the second half of the poem says, actually, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that it's better to forget. Is it better to forget me and live happily than it is to remember me and be sad? So Rossetti actually goes through a bit of a journey in her poem and realises that to be remembered once you're dead really is quite a fairly selfish thing. That actually it is much better for the person you love to forget you completely and live a happy life than to remember you and be constantly troubled and live in pain. So before we go into arguments, what you'll see here is I've done my boxes to show you how this should look in case any of you aren't sure. So you can see here I've got my annotations. I've also got down here my context, which I said earlier on. This is the key thing, help me understand the poem. I've got my structure as well. And then lastly, what I've added here, I've done the arguments, which I'll come to in a second. So I put argument 1, it is important to remember those who have gone, which is from the octet. And argument 2, it is better to forget and be happy than to live in pain remembering. Now this is what she says in the sestet. And what we want to do is we want to give each of those arguments a colour. So I'm going to give argument 1 the green colour. I'm going to give argument 2 the yellow colour. And then very simply to go through and decide which quotations from the poem should be which colour. Which goes with which. Now of course the green ones we'll find in the first 8 lines and the yellow ones we'll find in the last 6 lines. What you can also do is if you think that there's parts of the structure that go with the arguments, you can also highlight the structure. So for example, you might say, well actually, it's important to remember those who have gone and we love. So maybe the sonnet is actually a useful technique for that. So I might actually give the sonnet the green to show it goes with that argument there. Lastly, what I've also done now is because we've read 4 or 5 poems, we can start thinking about the poems it compares well with. And I put down a couple here for you to think about. So first of all, it compares very well with Funeral Blues, the first poem we read, because it is about people who have lost their loves or people who will lose their loves. And I suppose the difference between the poems is that Funeral Blues argues that life cannot continue, whereas Christina Rossetti argues that life should continue. You should actually forget the people. We could also compare it with Sonnet 18, Shakespeare's sonnet, because they're both about how we remember people. Shakespeare says that people are immortalised forever by being remembered in poetry, whereas Rossetti says actually it's a way of forgetting. So these are 2 poems we could use to compare with this poem later. So just to wrap up, last thing we need to do now is to think about our arguments. So I showed you on the visualizer how I've done mine. Please do yours the same. You can see in the speech bubbles here I put those 2 arguments up. And remember, we're always thinking about what is Rossetti arguing through her poetry. Now ideally you want to try and have 3 quotations or techniques for each argument. So you should have 6 things in total by the time that you finish going through this poem. So hopefully we've discussed these things today. What is Rossetti's message about relationships? She argues essentially that all relationships will end and that we should remember those that we have lost. However, she then goes on to argue that it's better for us to forget the loves that we have lost than it is to live in pain. And how does she use language, structure and form to convey her messages? So hopefully you found some good techniques that you think show those 2 arguments we talked about, and you've got those highlighted and can upload that work to show your teachers.